Worth, in Aurora Nightshade's world, had never been a virtue. It had been a ranking system written in bruises, in who ate first, in who was called by name and who was summoned by a whistle. Men called it order, elders called it law. She had learned its true grammar on winter stone floors, where silence was rewarded because silence looked like consent from across a room. If you did not cry out, they said you accepted your place. If you did not fight, they said you had no claim to better. The lie endured because it was convenient, and convenience had always worn a crown in Wolflands. By midwinter tribute week, the lower yard of Valewood Keep smelled of tallow smoke, wet fur, and fear sharpened into routine. Aurora knelt beside a trough with her hands in lye water so cold her fingers had gone beyond pain and into numbness, scrubbing blood from training leathers that were never hers to touch except when they were filthy. Iron bit her ankles where the transport shackles had rubbed skin open 2 nights earlier. A half-healed split crossed her lower lip. The Reclaim brand at her collarbone sat under rough linen, a warped crescent sigil scorched into her months ago, and tonight it pulsed with a deep, sick heat that made her stomach tighten. "Faster, Stray," said Garin, Cane Valewood's kennel captain, prodding the edge of the trough with his boot. "Tribute wagons leave at moonrise. The High Hall does not honor late deliveries." She did not answer. Answering invited conversation, and conversation invited punishment disguised as instruction. Garin crouched until his breath touched her cheek. "You will speak when addressed." Aurora kept her gaze on the leather strap in her hands. "Yes." Louder. "Yes, Captain." He straightened, dissatisfied even with obedience. "Lord Kane wants you washed and collared. You stand at his right in the Great Hall and confirm the writ when asked. If you stumble through your lines, I will drag you out by that pretty hair and let the hounds learn your scent for sport." The women at the next trough lowered their eyes. No one intervened. No one had intervened in years. Kane entered the yard as if arriving on a stage built for him alone, flanked by 2 hunters in dark pelts. He was handsome in the polished way of blades and ceremonial masks, with silver rings at every knuckle and a smile that never reached his eyes. The men around him shifted posture without thinking. Power bent spines faster than fear. "Aurora." He said her name like ownership papers being filed. "Look at me." She did. "Tonight you will remember your gratitude." His fingers closed under her chin, hard enough to bruise, angling her face toward the torchlight. "I pulled you from gutter packs and fed you. I clothed you. I gave you purpose. You put iron on me. You burned your mark into me while your steward counted seconds aloud." The thought flashed bright and dangerous. She swallowed it. Kane's thumb brushed the edge of her brand through the linen, and pain flared in a hot ring down her shoulder. "You will call yourself my reclaimed mate before the gathered alphas. You will confirm desertion and return. You will kneel when I command." His voice dropped, intimate with threat. "If you do well, you keep breathing in comfort. If you embarrass me, I strip skin from your privilege 1 rule at a time." Aurora heard herself say, "I understand." "Do you?" He smiled wider. "I wonder." He turned to his men, speaking as if she were furniture. "Bring the ink from my private chest. The old brand fades unevenly. Refresh it before we depart." A cold line ran through her despite the torch heat. Brand refresh. She had survived the first one because she had left her body, and waited somewhere far above the room until pain became distance. She had not known she could do that until forced to learn. The hunters obeyed. Garin shoved her to her feet and dragged her toward the inner chamber below the armory, where iron hooks lined one wall and a brazier already burned. 3 days earlier, she might have endured in silence again. 3 days earlier, she still believed endurance could be enough. The breaking point arrived as a scent. When Garin uncorked the ink vial, bitterness flooded the room, metallic and green, threaded with poison memory. Wolfsbane, Not crushed leaves, not old residue. Distilled and concentrated mixed into the black. Aurora's pulse kicked hard. That is not marking ink. Garen laughed. You know your poisons now? Kane stepped in behind him, removing his gloves finger by finger. It is exactly what I paid for. She stared at him. Why? Insurance. He tilted the vial, admiring the way it caught firelight. If some grandstanding alpha decides to challenge reclamation and claim your bond, the toxin will move through the first completion. Quick, elegant, deniable. Tragic mate fever collapse. Packs mourn. Politics proceed. For a moment the chamber narrowed to a pinprick of light. He was not merely reclaiming her, he was setting a trap with her body as bait. Kane circled her once, appraising. You should be honored. Your blood buys me a throne. He dismissed Garen with a flick, then addressed her directly, each word deliberate. Listen carefully. I will present a lawful writ. Windrider will posture, because he mistakes brutality for principle. He will challenge. He will die. The council will need stability, and I will provide it. You will stand beside me with your pretty, obedient silence while I inherit the high seat. Aurora's mouth tasted like rust. Bastion Windrider has never taken the crown. He will, for you. Men always reach when shown a symbol. You are an old line in a useful body. His eyes hardened. Do not flatter yourself into thinking this is romance. He seized her wrist, dragged her toward the brazier, and nodded to Garen. Chains rattled. Inside her, the numbness she had carried for months cracked apart. I am in this room, and I am going to die if I stay in this shape of life. Not tonight, perhaps. Not by blade, maybe not even by poison first, but piece by piece until no voice remains and they call that peace. I can feel the floor under my bare feet, the iron heat on my skin, his grip like a clamp, and I understand with absolute clarity that obedience has never bought safety, only a later hour of hurt. If I run, I may be caught. If I fight, I may fail. If I kneel, I disappear. I do not want to disappear. I do not want to be used to kill a stranger who never touched me. I do not want my silence mistaken for agreement one more time. She went still, letting her weight sag as if faintness had taken her. Garen cursed and shifted his hold to keep her upright. Kane leaned in, impatient. Aurora drove her forehead into Kane's nose. Cartilage cracked with a muffled pop. He staggered back with a shout. Garen lunged. She tore free by leaving skin on the chain edge, pain burning up her forearm, then kicked the brazier stand. Coals exploded across stone. Smoke surged. One hunter stumbled, swearing as sparks caught his sleeve. She ran, not toward the gate, where guards would expect desperation. She cut through the salt room, slid beneath hanging carcasses in the smokehouse corridor, and hit the laundry stair 2 at a time. Her breath scraped, her feet slapped bare on rough boards, then stone, then frozen mud in the outer court. Behind her, horns blared short and sharp, the keep's hunt signal. Left at the tannery wall, over the runoff trench. Through the market lane where winter stalls stood shuttered and skeletal, her shoulder slammed a cart axle. She kept going. Lantern lights swung wild as townsfolk flattened against walls, smelling trouble and refusing to choose sides. "Stop her!" someone shouted. "No chains, no wolf. She won't make the ridge," another voice answered. Aurora vaulted a low fence and dropped into the river culvert, ankle deep in black meltwater that knifed cold into her cuts. She bit down on a cry and climbed out the far side by hauling herself up roots and broken brick. The Reclaim brand burned hotter with each heartbeat, as if Kane's hand still pressed there. Warm blood slicked her heel where iron had reopened skin. The great hall rose ahead beyond torchlit terraces, carved from old mountain stone and ringed with banners of every pack attending tribute. She had seen it only from service entrances, never through the front approach reserved for alphas and envoys. Drums thudded inside, Voices echoed. Ceremony had already begun. A horn sounded behind her, closer now. Kane's hunters were minutes back, maybe less. She hit the upper steps at a stumble and forced herself upright. Two gate guards moved to block her, then froze when they saw the brand and blood and the look on her face that was beyond pleading. "Move," she rasped. They did. The doors stood open to heat, smoke, and 100 watchful eyes. Aurora crossed the threshold barefoot and bleeding into the center of midwinter tribute, and silence fell so hard it seemed to strike the stone. At the far end of the hall, on the high dais beneath carved moonwolves, Bastion Windrider sat in the king's chair he refused to call his own. Scarred hands braced on the arms, expression carved from winter. Kane's hunters burst in behind her. Protocol should have been simple. Return property. Restore order. Bastion rose instead. With one sweep of his arm, he cleared the throne of ceremonial regalia, silver bowl and oath scrolls clattering across the dais, and his voice carried to every corner of the hall. "Come here," he said to Aurora, not taking his eyes off the men behind her. "Stand where kings stand." She climbed the steps on shaking legs. The first drop of her blood struck carved stone at the dais edge. Moon runes no one had seen lit in a generation ignited beneath her feet, silver fire racing through old channels in the floor, and the hall inhaled as one living body. For 3 breaths after the runes ignited, no one moved. Silver light coursed beneath Aurora's feet in branching lines that had slept inside the stone longer than she had been alive, climbing the carved wolves around the dais and catching in their eyes until the old statues seemed to wake. The hunters behind her skidded to a halt at the base of the steps, curses half-formed, suddenly wary of crossing into a blaze they did not understand. Smoke from the braziers curled toward the rafters in slow ribbons, and under it all she heard her own breathing, ragged and thin, as if it belonged to someone else. She was shaking so hard her teeth clicked once. The great hall smelled of fur cloaks wet from snow, hot iron from banked coals, old oak soaked in mead and council arguments, and the bitter edge of fear trying to disguise itself as outrage. Every pack banner ringed the chamber, wolf sigils stitched in silver, crimson, and black. She recognized Valewood's crest near the west pillar and had to stop herself from flinching away from it like flame. Her feet left small, dark crescents on the moonstone. At the center of it all stood Bastion Windrider. From the yard gossip and muttered threats, she had assembled him in fragments over the years. War alpha, oathbreaker to crowns, butcher of raiders, guardian of borders, too dangerous to challenge and too stubborn to rule. The man before her made those rumors feel thin. He was taller than Kane by a head, broad through the shoulders in a way that suggested controlled force rather than ceremony. His dark hair tied back roughly as if vanity had never won a debate with urgency. A scar crossed one cheek and disappeared into the edge of his collar. Another marked the side of his throat, pale against weathered skin. He wore no jeweled mantle, only a black tunic beneath a fur-lined coat and a heavy sword at his back. He looked like a storm that had learned restraint. His people responded to him without visible signal. A line of Windrider guards moved from the side aisles to the base of the dais, not drawing blades, only occupying space with disciplined finality. One of Kane's hunters stepped forward anyway, palm up in mock diplomacy. "By reclamation law," the hunter called, voice carrying. "The woman on that dais is Valewood property. Return her and no blood follows." A murmur rolled through the gathered alphas, the sound of men weighing statutes against spectacle. Aurora's stomach folded in on itself. Property. The word landed with such old familiarity it almost numbed her. Almost. She had heard it in kennels, in transport ledgers, in Kane's private chamber where legal language was sharpened into personal cruelty. She waited for the expected motion now. The powerful man at the top of the world would pass her down like disputed livestock, and the hall would call it order. Bastian did not look at the hunter. He looked only at her. The hall's firelight caught the planes of his face, the set of his mouth, the jagged line of old healing over his left brow. There was no soft comfort in him, nothing polished, nothing designed to soothe a frightened woman into compliance. But there was a tension, full and unbroken, and the absence of calculation hit her harder than a shout. The hunter tried again, louder. "You heard me." This time Bastian answered, voice low and precise. "I heard you." The hunter spread his hands. "Then honor law." Bastian's gaze remained on Aurora, as if the rest of the room existed at a lesser volume. "Law will be honored," he said. "The true one." The hunter's lip curled. "She wears Valewood's reclaim brand." Aurora's hand went instinctively to her collarbone. Heat pulsed under the linen, sharp enough to make her breath hitch. She forced herself not to fold inward around it. She had curled small for survival too many times already. Across the chamber, an elder in bone-white robes rose from the council ring. "Windrider, do not make this theater. The rights are clear." Another elder, older and flint-eyed, stared at the glowing floor and whispered to no one, "Those wards answer blood." A different kind of silence answered that, thin and dangerous. Aurora swayed once. She had run until her lungs burned, fought chains with raw skin, crossed a hall full of enemies, and now adrenaline was leaking out of her in cold, dizzy waves. The edges of her vision narrowed. She bent her knees to keep from collapsing and tasted copper, where she'd bitten her lip too hard. "I am still standing. I am still here. The stone is real under my feet. The light is real, and no one has put a hand on me yet. I keep waiting for the catch, for the bargain hidden under this mercy, because mercy has always been rented in my life, and the bill always came due. If he sends me back, I think I will break in a place I cannot repair. If he keeps me, maybe that is only a different cage with finer walls. But he told me to stand where kings stand, and my body heard it like a command to live. I do not know what this is. I only know I am done kneeling to men who call control protection." A movement at the hall entrance pulled every gaze. Cain Valewood strode in, blood dark at one nostril where she had struck him, rage arranged into elegance by sheer force of will. He had changed into ceremonial leathers as if the interruption were merely another scene in an evening he still directed. Behind him came more retainers, then 2 legal scribes with satchels and sealed tubes. He wanted witnesses. He wanted paperwork. He wanted humiliation formalized. "Aurora," Cain said, as if addressing a disobedient hound, "come down." Her feet did not move. Cain's smile was all teeth. "You mistake panic for freedom. Return now, and I may yet be generous." Bastian turned slightly then, placing his body between Cain's line of sight and Aurora without touching her, a shift so small it might have looked casual to anyone who had never studied danger. To Aurora, it felt like a wall built in one breath. Cain's gaze snapped to him. "Windrider, you interfere in private bond law." "You call coercion a bond," Bastian replied. "You brought hunters into my hall during tribute. You threatened guest safety under my roof." "She is no guest." The runes at Aurora's feet flared brighter as if answering the lie. Cain noticed it and, for the first time since entering, uncertainty flickered across his face. He smothered it quickly. "You would challenge signed writ with old stone tricks?" "Produce the writ," said Bastian. One of Cain's scribes hurried forward and unrolled a parchment case, wax seal gleaming. Words in black legal script marched across the page in rigid confidence. Aurora saw her name, the term reclaimed mate, the clauses of return at moonrise. Her throat tightened until swallowing hurt. Cain lifted his chin. "Recognized by 3 lesser councils, witnessed and lawful." Bastian took one step up the dais toward Aurora, not the writ, and the distance between them shortened to a few feet of charged air. Then it happened. She inhaled cedar smoke, steel, and storm rain. The scent struck her like memories she had never lived, clean and wild and impossibly familiar, and her pulse stumbled into a second rhythm that did not belong to fear. It answered something in him, matched and mirrored, echo finding mountain after years spent calling into empty valleys. Heat ran along her spine in a bright line. Her skin prickled. The hall blurred at the edges until there was only his face, his breath, the raw astonishment crossing it. Bastian drew in a sharp breath, as if someone had landed a blow to his ribs. Amber bled through his irises, slow at first and then all at once, the predator surfacing behind disciplined human control. Fine, pale marks along his scars lit with dormant runes, gold under skin. His hand flexed on the carved arm of the throne he had abandoned moments before, and old wood splintered under his grip with a hard crack that ricocheted through the chamber. Gasps rose from the gathered packs. Aurora could not have looked away if the ceiling had fallen. Desire was not the right word for what tore through her. Desire implied choice made in safety, and this was older, larger, terrifying in its certainty. Terror slammed against it in equal force. She had worn another man's brand. She had been told touch was ownership, care was leverage, tenderness was a prelude to control. Every lesson of survival screamed retreat. Yet the pull remained. Not dragging, not consuming, simply waiting, as if some part of her had been standing at this threshold for years without knowing what doorway it faced. His gaze locked on hers. Not her wounds, not her blood, her. Cain said something sharp from below, but the words dissolved under the roar of Aurora's heartbeat and the answering cadence beneath it. She felt both at once now, two drums finding shared measure. Bastian's expression changed from shock to fierce, almost reverent focus. Slowly, visibly, he set his broken grip free of the throne wood and lowered both hands to his sides, empty, palms open. Then he moved. He descended one step, then another, stopping at her level, close enough that she could see the tiny silver threads in his eyes where gold had overtaken amber, close enough to smell rain on stone beneath cedar and steel, close enough that if he reached for her, she might bolt or break or both. He did neither. He dropped to one knee on the blood-lit dais. The motion sent a shockwave through the hall. Alphas did not kneel in public, least of all this one, least of all now with rival packs watching and Cain poised to exploit any weakness. Bastian seemed not to care. He tipped his head, not in submission to council or crowd, but in deliberate offering to the woman trembling before him. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that she felt it more than heard it, yet every corner of the hall went still to catch it. "You are not claimed," he said. "You are chosen." The words landed in her like clean water on a burn, and for one suspended heartbeat the fear inside her did not vanish, but it finally had something equal standing against it. Cain's laugh cut across the silence, brittle with disbelief. "Chosen? How poetic. Are we performing courtship now, Windrider? Or do you intend to govern a hall?" Bastian rose in one smooth motion and turned, placing himself at the edge of the dais so every eye had to pass through him before reaching Aurora. "You entered under truce banners," he said. "You brought armed hunters to seize a bleeding woman in my tribute hall. Until council review, she stands as my protected guest. She stands as my reclaimed mate." The silver runes under Aurora's feet pulsed once, bright as a struck bell. Bastian's jaw tightened. "Then the hall itself objects to your wording." A ripple of unease moved through the assembled alphas. No one wanted to challenge awakened moon wards in the same breath they argued legal process. Cain read the room, adjusted, and lifted one hand in false patience. "Very well. Review your little miracle. At moonrise, I will expect law, not sentiment." He stepped back with a theatrical bow that convinced no one. "Do not misplace what belongs to me. Aurora braced for Bastion's hand on her arm. It never came. He turned enough that she could see his profile and asked, in a voice pitched only for her, "Can you walk to the healer chamber if I clear the path?" The question hit harder than any command. "Yes," she whispered, though her knees shook. He nodded once, then addressed the hall captain below. "Captain Ilya, hold the dais perimeter. No one enters the east wing without my leave. Elder records can wait, blood loss cannot." A few elders started to protest. Bastion did not raise his voice. Object in writing. He descended one step and paused, giving Aurora room to choose. She moved beside him, not behind him, and the two of them crossed the dais through a corridor of stairs. The silver in the floor dimmed as her blood dried, but each rune held a low moonlit glow, like coals waiting for breath. The east wing smelled of clean linen, crushed rosemary, and hot water. Stone walls muffled the hall's noise into a distant pulse. An older healer with braided gray hair looked up from a tray of salves as they entered, her sharp gaze taking in Aurora's feet, wrists, and brand without a single expression of pity. "Bed," the healer said. Aurora stopped at once, chest tightening. Bed meant enclosed corners, hands at her shoulders, fabric tied too tight. Bastion noticed before she spoke. "She can sit by the hearth," he said. The healer gave him a long, irritated look that suggested she had once scolded him through fever and did not fear him now. "Then she sits by the hearth. If she faints on my floor, you are mopping it." Aurora almost stared. No one spoke to men like him that way in Valewood lands and remained upright afterward. Bastion inclined his head. "Fair." He drew a low stool near the fire and stepped back. "May I bring water to you?" She nodded, and he moved slowly, deliberately visible, taking a copper basin from the table and filling it from the steaming kettle. When he knelt in front of her with the basin between them, she felt panic spike again, reflexive and old. A kneeling man had preceded pain too many times in her memory. He saw it. "I will not touch you without permission," he said. "Not now. Not later." The healer gave a small grunt, as if this were the first sensible sentence she had heard all evening, then set clean bandages on a bench and left through the inner arch. The curtain fell behind her, granting privacy without sealing the room. Bastion rested his forearms on his thighs, hands open. "Aurora, may I wash the blood from your feet so we can see what needs stitching?" No one had asked her that before. Ever. She swallowed. "You don't have servants for this?" "I do." His mouth tilted, humor edged with self-mockery. "Most of them mutiny when I attempt kindness because I do it badly. Tonight this is mine to do." When she did not answer, he added, "If you want the healer instead, say so." Aurora looked at the water steaming faintly in the basin, then at his hands, scarred and steady. "You can." He waited for a second nod, received it, and only then slid one palm under her heel. His touch was firm enough to support, gentle enough to withdraw instantly if she jerked away. Warm water closed over split skin. Dirt and blood clouded in rust-red swirls. "Too hot?" he asked. "No." "Too much pressure?" "No." He cleaned each cut with methodical patience, pausing before every bandage. "May I wrap this one? May I lift your ankle? May I check the chain burn?" The repeated asking should have felt formal, maybe absurd, yet with each question her breath loosened a fraction. Choice, offered often enough, began to feel less like a trap and more like ground. When the outer door latch clicked, sharp metal on stone, Aurora flinched so hard the stool legs scraped. Bastion did not turn toward the sound first. He set her foot down, rose, unbuckled his sword, and carried it across the room to lay it on the far table well out of his reach. Only then did he call, calm and flat, "No entry." A guard voice answered through the wood. Message from council, my lord. Slide it under. A parchment edge appeared beneath the door and vanished. Bastian left it there untouched and returned to the stool. I have a standing feud with Dr. Latches, he said dryly, taking up fresh cloth. They announce trouble like proud little trumpets. Aurora blinked at him. He kept talking while he worked, tone light but not forced. Last week one snapped during supper and launched into my stew. The table celebrated because everyone agreed the latch improved the flavor. A startled sound escaped her, half cough, half laugh. She clamped her mouth shut, shocked at herself. His eyes softened, not triumphant, just relieved. There it is, he murmured, proof this hall still contains miracles. Heat rose to her face that had nothing to do with the fire. He tied off the final bandage and sat back on his heels, giving distance. Your wrists next, if you allow it. She held them out before she could overthink the motion. By the time he finished, the coals had settled into a low red glow, and her body had started to register exhaustion now that terror was not the only sensation in command. Bastian stood and lifted his heavy fur cloak from his shoulders. You'll need this, he said. I can't take your rank cloak. You can? I run hot and make poor decisions in winter anyway. Despite herself, she looked him over. Tunic damp at the collar from melted snow, old scars pale against skin, no sign he was cold at all. Still, she hesitated. He did not drape it over her without asking. He held it out, waiting. When she accepted, the fur settled around her like shelter, smelling of cedar, smoke, and rain. I should stay awake, she said. Cain will not wait quietly. He won't, Bastian agreed. Neither will I. She eyed the narrow cot by the wall. Where will you sleep? He pointed to the inside of the door. There. That floor is stone. Stone and I are old companions. A beat passed. You don't trust your own guards? I trust them. His expression sharpened, honest and unvarnished. I also know what fear can make men obey when another alpha shouts legal words loudly enough. Tonight, no one crosses that threshold unless they cross me first. Aurora lay down, still wrapped in his cloak, uncertain how to carry gratitude without mistaking it for debt. Bastian settled against the door, knees drawn up, forearms resting loosely over them, eyes open toward the room rather than the hall. In the dark between wakefulness and sleep, her thoughts turned raw and immediate. I keep waiting for the hidden demand. I keep waiting for him to collect payment, because that is how men with power have always balanced the ledger in my world. Yet he asked before touching a torn ankle. He moved his blade when I startled. He sat at a door like a guard dog who chose his post. If this is strategy, it is the strangest one I have ever seen. If this is care, I do not know how to stand in it without shaking. I am so tired of bracing. I do not want to trust quickly and drown for it. But I am breathing. In this room, I am breathing. 3 hours later, long after the hall bells marked midnight, the summons came from council. The chamber of judgment was colder than the healer wing, all polished slate and carved law tablets lit by narrow braziers. Elders sat in a crescent above the floor, robes layered in rank colors. Scribes lined the side benches with ink-stained fingers ready to trap every word. Cain stood to the left with his legal team, composure restored, nose newly set, and bound in discreet white linen. He smiled when Aurora entered, and the old nausea flickered, then receded when she felt Bastian's presence at her right flank, close, but not crowding. An elder struck the staff once. Proceed, question of lineage and reclamation status. Another elder, sharp-nosed and impatient, peered at Aurora. If she claims royal blood through the old moon line, let her show the brand and shoulder marks now for verification. Publicly. No veils, no delays. The request was legal. The tone was not. Aurora's hand went to her collarbone. Expose it in a room full of men who had debated her like livestock before dawn. Let them inspect pain and call it procedure. Bastian stepped forward, precisely 1 pace, enough to break their direct sightline to her without blocking her voice. Denied. The elder's mouth thinned. You deny council authority? I deny spectacle disguised as evidence. His gaze swept the crescent. Guest law of the High Hall is older than your current charter and binding on every pack present. She entered under sanctuary and bled on warded stone. Until adjudication concludes, any insult or coercive demand against her is an insult against my blood. Murmurs rose, some approving, some scandalized. A senior jurist leaned toward the center. Windrider, that invocation carries formal censure if misused. Record the censure, Bastian said. I accept it. Kane spread his hands. How noble, how convenient. Hide the brand and call it honor. Aurora expected Bastian to cut him down with command. Instead, he turned slightly toward her, giving her the floor in front of everyone. She speaks for herself, he said, voice ringing through the chamber. But none of you will speak over her again. Silence gathered, taut as a drawn bow. Aurora stepped around him until she stood fully visible to the council, her pulse hammered, but her voice held. You want proof. You will have lawful proof, not a public stripping. Have the healers and wardkeeper inspect the brand in a sealed chamber with 2 elder witnesses from opposing packs. Record findings under oath. If the writ is true, I face its terms. If it is forged, he does. She pointed at Kane without looking away from the elders. And if any of you call coercion marriage again, say it while the truth wards are lit. The sharp-nosed elder bristled. You address this chamber boldly for a servant. I was a servant, Aurora said. I am not kneeling now. A long pause followed. Then the flint-eyed elder from the hall inclined her head, almost imperceptibly. Motion accepted. Sealed inspection at first light. Dual witnesses. Truth ward active. Kane's smile faltered for the first time. The staff struck again. So ordered. As scribes bent to record, Kane leaned toward Bastian and murmured, low enough to feign privacy, loud enough for Aurora to hear. You guard her like a treasure because you think she is yours. Bastian's answer was quiet iron. I guard her because she is hers. They exited into the corridor as dawn's first gray seeped through the high arrow slits. Frost traced the stone edges in thin white veins. Aurora stopped beside a pillar, suddenly unsteady not from fear this time, but from the strain of holding herself rigid for hours. Bastian halted a respectful step away. Do you need water? She looked at him for a long moment, then gave the smallest nod. And thank you. The words felt awkward, fragile. He treated them like an oath. Any time, he said. When he offered his arm, he did not presume. She studied the space between them, the patience in his posture, the fact that he would wait either way. Then, slowly, Aurora placed her hand on his sleeve and let some portion of her guard come down without letting go of herself. Aurora's fingers tightened once on Bastian's sleeve, then settled as they started down the frost-lined corridor together. His pace matched hers exactly, neither hurrying nor slowing to make a gesture of patience, simply moving beside her as if shared rhythm were the most natural law in the world. At the far archway, Captain Ilya appeared at a near run, breath fogging in the cold air, one gloved hand already pressed to his chest in formal salute. My lord, my lady. His eyes flicked to Aurora, deliberate respect replacing the uncertainty she had seen in so many others. Outer scouts confirm Valewood standards at the South Ridge, not a raid line, structured columns. Legal banners in front, war shields behind. Bastian's expression sharpened. Number. 400 inside immediate call, another 200 an hour out. Scribes and council witnesses traveling in their center. Aurora felt the old training and threat assessment return with cruel clarity. Legal banners meant ceremony. War shields meant coercion if ceremony failed. Ilya continued, voice tight with controlled anger. Kane requests formal audience under reclamation right articles. He claims this hall is in unlawful possession of bonded property and asks for transfer at moonrise. Property. Again. Bastian did not swear. Somehow that made his restraint more dangerous. Hold all gates. Admit only named delegates. No one from Valewood moves in this keep without escort. Ilya bowed and vanished back down the corridor. They reached the healer chamber, and for a few moments the world narrowed to steam from the kettle and the rasp of Aurora's own pulse in her ears. The older healer Mara looked up as they entered, took in their faces, and said without preamble, "Sit. Both of you look like wolves who swallowed nails." Bastian remained standing near the door. "Kane has arrived with a legal host." Mara's mouth flattened. "Then law will get people killed politely." Aurora sat by the hearth because her legs finally demanded it. The warmth should have eased her, but fear and bond sense tangled under her skin in a way that left her raw. Bastian crouched in front of her, forearms on his knees, close enough to anchor and far enough not to trap. "He will force a hearing within the hour," he said. "I need you informed before anyone else speaks over you. Reclamation right gives a former holder claim at moonrise if he produces writ and witness seals. A challenge can block transfer, but only through blood trial or crown invocation." She held his gaze. "And if you challenge as claimant?" "Then I stand as mate contender in open law." His jaw shifted. Controlled fury held on a short leash. "Kane wants that. Because he thinks he can beat you? Because he thinks he can kill me with legitimacy." Mara made a low sound in her throat and crossed to a shelf, pulling a wrapped bundle from a locked drawer. "He does not only think, he prepared." She unrolled stained linen. Inside lay the scrap of old dressing she had removed from Aurora's collarbone at dawn. Ink-black residue dried along the edge. Mara dipped a blade tip in clear spirit and touched the cloth. A bitter green sheen rose through the black. Aurora's breath caught. Wolfsbane. Mara nodded grimly. Bound in oil, slow release, nasty work. It sits quiet in scar tissue until heat spikes, and bond hormones drive circulation hard. First, full mate bond completion could push toxin straight through both partners. Bastian went absolutely still. Not shocked, calculating. Mara looked from one to the other. If Kane can force a rushed claiming or provoke one in panic, he turns your bond into a weapon. He does not need to win a duel if he can wait for poison to do politics for him. The crux became brutally clean. Kane was not chasing Aurora because he wanted her back. He wanted her bloodline as a key, and her body as a trap. Then Bastian's death wrapped in legal language. Whatever softness had begun between her and Bastian had to survive in a field mined by ritual. A guard knocked once and entered at Bastian's permission, carrying a sealed tube. "From council chamber? Immediate assembly." Bastian took the tube, broke the wax, read, then handed it to Aurora. "Summons under high articles. Reclamation petition. Presence mandatory." He looked at her, not the parchment. "Do you want me beside you in the circle or at your back?" The question, simple as it was, steadied her more than reassurance would have. "Beside me. Then beside you." By late afternoon, the sky beyond the high slits had turned the color of forged steel, and the great hall had transformed from tribute court into tribunal. Benches were packed with pack delegates wrapped in winter pelts, murmurs rising and breaking like rough surf against stone. Kane stood in the center circle in ceremonial black, pristine now, with 3 lesser council seals displayed on a silver chain across his chest. Behind him, his legal scribes arranged documents with the calm precision of men who had rehearsed victory. Aurora and Bastian entered together. Heads turned. The bond thrummed low between them, a second current under everything else, and when his sleeve brushed her hand, she felt warmth arc through her chest so suddenly she had to draw a careful breath. Not possession, recognition. The distinction mattered, and it frightened her because she wanted to trust it. Cain bowed to the elders with theatrical respect. Honored counsel, I invoke reclamation right on lawful grounds. The woman Aurora Nightshade absconded from bonded status under my protection. I submit writ, witness affidavits, and steward testimony. I request immediate return at moonrise. He held up parchment. The script looked official enough to deceive a room that wanted procedure more than truth. Flint-eyed Elder Sorrel extended a hand. Present for review. As scribes passed documents up the crescent, Cain continued, voice carrying. I am not unreasonable. I accept that Windrider Hall sought emergency sanctuary during disorder. I do not challenge hospitality. I challenge ongoing unlawful retention. Bastion's tone cut in, low and precise. You challenge a woman's autonomy and call it retention. Cain's smile sharpened. Autonomy does not nullify bond law. Aurora stepped forward one pace before any elder could answer. Coercion nullifies it. The hall rustled. Sorrel struck her staff once for silence. Cain turned toward Aurora with practiced sorrow. You are distressed. Understandably. Flight trauma can distort memory. I am prepared to forgive violence committed during panic. Forgive, as if he were magnanimous over the cuts he had ordered. Aurora felt heat pulse beneath her skin, instincts sharpening to a bright edge. You mixed wolfsbane into my brand. A ripple of shock spread faster than any shouted accusation. Cain did not blink. Allegation without proof. Mara stepped from the witness bench at Sorrel's gesture, laid the treated cloth and vials on the evidence table, and spoke in a healer's flat certainty. Tested under spirit and moon salt in front of 2 scribes. Wolfsbane suspension confirmed. Cain tilted his head. Even if true, contamination from kennels is common. You have no chain of custody predating Windrider intervention. The legal move was elegant and vile. He did not need innocence, only doubt. Bastion moved as if to step into the center, then stopped himself and glanced at Aurora first. The restraint struck her like a vow renewed in real time. She lifted her chin. Request Truth Ward activation for all contested documents and testimony. An elder to Sorrel's left frowned. Full activation drains hall reserves and marks falsehood with permanent stain. Extreme measure. Sorrel studied Aurora, then Cain, then Bastion. Extreme case. Cain spread his hands. I welcome truth. He was lying. Everyone felt it, yet law demanded process. Sorrel conferred in low tones with 2 senior jurists. At length she said, Ward activation delayed until moonrise to ensure full witness presence under right statutes. Until then, claimant and challenged remain under guard authority. Cain had what he needed, time and pressure. As the chamber shifted toward procedural recess, he leaned just enough for Aurora and Bastion to hear, voice, silk over iron. Moonrise comes quickly in winter. Choose wisely which of you dies for principle. Bastion's shoulders tightened, and amber bled into his irises for one dangerous heartbeat before he forced control back. Aurora touched his wrist, light but deliberate. He looked down at her hand as if it were the only honest thing in the room. They withdrew to an antechamber off the hall, while captains argued guard rotations outside. The room smelled of parchment and cold stone, and dusk pressed at the windows. For several breaths, neither spoke. Then Aurora said, If you challenge him as mate and the bond seals fully, the poison may hit you first. And if I do nothing, they try to drag you out under law. I know. He faced her fully then, the war alpha stripped down to a man holding too many impossible variables. There may be another path. Crown invocation by royal blood can supersede reclamation right and force trial of blood and crown, but it requires you to claim publicly what the runes only hinted. Fear moved through her, sharp and old. Claiming blood meant becoming a target with a larger title. He continued, voice rougher now. I will not ask you to take a throne to save me. I will stand trial myself first if that is your choice. The Bond answered his honesty with a deep, aching pull. She could feel his restraint like a physical thing, every instinct in him geared toward protection, every action bent around her consent. I am standing in a stone room with a man powerful enough to command armies, and he is still asking what I choose. I am terrified of wanting what I have never had, because wanting means exposure, and exposure used to mean pain. But this is different in all the places that count. He does not call fear weakness. He does not call control love. If I let myself lean toward him, I am not vanishing. I am arriving. The danger is real. The poison is real. Cain is at the gates with 600 reasons to destroy us. And still there is this stubborn, living truth. I would rather fight beside a man who kneels than survive under one who brands. A bell sounded once from the outer wall, then another, faster. Captain Ilya burst through the side door without ceremony, face set hard. Kane's forward companies are moving inside the lower terraces under writ privilege. He brought chain wardens with moon irons, says they are standard transfer personnel. Bastion's expression turned to cold steel. I gave no leave for wardens in my hall. He claims council preclearance from 2 elders. Aurora rose, pulse kicking. He is forcing the hand now, before Truth Ward? Ilya nodded. And there is more. His herald just delivered amended petition. He invokes emergency clause. If transfer is obstructed, he demands immediate blood trial at moonrise with execution authority for the losing claimant. Bastion took the parchment Ilya offered, eyes scanning once. He wants spectacle and a body. Yours, Aurora said. Or yours, Bastion answered quietly. Outside, the corridor filled with bootsteps and shouted orders. Through the narrow window slit, Aurora saw torch lines snaking across the terraces below, too many flames for a simple legal escort. Cain had dressed an occupation as due process. Ilya drew closer, voice low. My lord, my lady, we can barricade East Wing and buy time, but if we refuse chamber summons now, Cain will call it admission and press armed retrieval. Bastion looked to Aurora. If we go in, he triggers the right under his terms. If we refuse, he brands you fugitive before every pack. The second bell began to toll for moonrise preparations, deep and relentless. From the hall beyond came Cain's amplified voice, smooth as polished bone. Bring Aurora Nightshade to the center circle. By law and witness, reclamation proceeds. The air tightened like a drawn wire. Aurora stepped toward the door. Bastion moved with her. This time, neither of them could afford to kneel. Cain's amplified voice rolled through the hall again, smooth and merciless. Bring Aurora Nightshade to the center circle. By law and witness, reclamation proceeds. Aurora and Bastion stepped through the antechamber door shoulder to shoulder, and the tribunal floor opened before them like a trap dressed in ritual. Moonrise torches had been lit along every pillar, their pale flame throwing long shadows over the carved wolves and the crescent of elders. Cain had used the recess well. Chain wardens in black stood at measured intervals around the center ring, moon irons looped at their belts, wrists wrapped in legal white cords to signal official function. Behind them, Valewood soldiers held formation with shields lowered but ready, while Windrider guards mirrored them at the opposite arc, tension braided tight between both lines. This was no hearing now, it was staged seizure. Elder Sorrel struck her staff once, the crack of wood on stone barely louder than the pulse pounding in Aurora's ears. Parties present, emergency petition recognized. Claimant may state terms. Cain moved to the center with impeccable composure, bowing just enough to honor process and nothing more. By reclamation right and amended emergency article, I demand immediate transfer at moonrise. Obstruction authorizes blood trial with execution authority vested in this chamber. He lifted a sealed document toward the Elder Crescent. Writ reaffirmed by witness seals. Transfer personnel present. Delay constitutes sedition against bonded law. He turned toward Aurora, and the expression he wore was almost tender, which made it more frightening than rage. Come willingly, you know what follows if you force spectacle. Bastian took one step forward. You came armed for abduction and call it law. You brought moon irons before verdict. I brought tools for compliance. Kane's eyes slid to him. Stand aside, Windrider, or bleed for theft. A murmur broke across the benches. Kane raised his hand, and one of his scribes hurried up, unrolling the writ for all to see. Aurora's name, bold and binding, clauses of ownership, 3 wax seals. The parchment looked flawless. Then Kane spoke a phrase in old claim tongue, quiet enough to feel private, loud enough for her to hear. By branded right, kneel. Pain detonated at Aurora's collarbone. The reclaim scar blazed as if a hot hook had been driven through it, and her knees buckled before she caught herself. A collective gasp tore through the hall as she staggered in the circle light. Bastian surged toward her, and 6 chain wardens stepped in at once, moon irons drawn. Windrider guards moved in answer. Steel hissed from sheaths. For one breath, everything held at the edge of open battle. Stand down, Sorel thundered. Any blade crossing the center without ruling will be named traitor to council. No one obeyed immediately. Boots scraped. Shields rose. Kane smiled with the faint satisfaction of a man watching a snare tighten exactly as designed. Aurora pressed her palm over the burning scar and tasted blood where she'd bitten the inside of her cheek. Panic clawed up hard and familiar. This was the shape of every old room. Men arguing above her body while pain decided her posture. Not this time. By the time the second moonrise bell finished tolling, she knew one fact with absolute clarity. If she let process carry her, Kane would use law as a blade until there was nothing left of choice. I am in the circle, and everyone is waiting for me to be an object with a pulse. I can feel fear trying to fold me into that old, small shape, the one that survives by disappearing. I know this script. Men name me, move me, punish me, and call it order. But the runes woke for my blood, not his. The bond did not ask me to submit. It answered me. If I stay silent now, I hand my future to the loudest liar in the room. If I speak, I may start a war in a hall already choking on steel. I am afraid. I am shaking. I am still choosing. I would rather break this law open than be carried back inside it. I would rather die standing in my own name than live as someone's evidence. She dropped her hand from her scar and stepped into the exact center of the moon-marked ring. Elder Sorel, she said, voice cutting clean through the noise. I reject transfer. I invoke trial of blood and crown in my own name. The chamber froze. Even Kane's smile faltered. A jurist stood abruptly. Only verified royal line may invoke that article. Then verify it, Aurora said. Now. Under truth ward. In full witness. Kane recovered first, sharp and contemptuous. A servant reciting dead law does not become sovereign. Aurora held out her hand toward the Elder Crescent. Ritual blade. No one moved for 2 breaths. Then Sorel descended 1 step and drew a short ceremonial knife from her belt, its hilt carved with the moon sigil older than any current charter. She stopped at the circle edge, eyes fixed on Aurora. Once begun, this cannot be withdrawn. Aurora took the blade. I am done withdrawing. She cut her palm in one decisive stroke and pressed her blood to the throne sigil inlaid at the ring's center. Silver fire erupted through the floor, not a flare this time, but a full awakening. Lines of light raced from her handprint to every carved channel in the great hall, climbing columns, crossing the elder dais, threading beneath the witness benches. The air thickened with cold radiance, and a low harmonic hum rose from the stone itself, ancient and unmistakably alive. Several delegates dropped to one knee on instinct, others stared in naked alarm. Kane snapped, "Counter ward! Shut it down!" His own wardsmith lunged for a suppression charm, but the moment he touched the floor-scribed line, it sparked and threw him back on his heels. Truth Sight had sealed. Sorel's voice rang over the hum. All contested instruments to center. A scribe, hands trembling, carried Kane's writ into the light and laid it atop Aurora's blood mark. For one suspended heartbeat, nothing happened. Then black stain bloomed across the parchment from seal to signature. Wax cracked. Ink lines warped and ran as if exposed to fire, though no flame touched it. Before the entire hall, the forged writ curled inward, brittle, and collapsed into gray flakes that scattered over the sigil. The chamber exploded in shouts. "Forgery! Oath breach! Seize him!" Kane moved before anyone else could. He tore a hidden blade from inside his sleeve and pivoted, not toward Aurora, but past her, aiming at Bastion's exposed flank where chain wardens had still boxed him out of the circle. It was quick, practiced, and meant to end everything in one legal panic. Aurora saw the line of the strike and did not think. Heat surged through her bones, fierce and silver bright. The world snapped into scent and motion. Her body changed in a rush that was pain and power braided together, muscle reshaping, senses widening, a white pelt breaking through skin in a wash of light. She hit Kane mid-lunge as a wolf threaded with moonfire, driving him sideways across the dais before his blade reached Bastion. Stones shattered under their impact. Kane snarled and shifted half-form in answer, claws tearing grooves in the moonstone as he twisted free. His wolf side was dark, rangy, vicious with desperation. He slashed for her throat. She turned with predator precision and took the blow across shoulder fur, then drove into him again, forcing him away from the elder crescent. At the perimeter, Valewood guards charged. Bastion roared, half-shift bursting through restraint, amber blazing as fangs lengthened. He met the first line like a moving wall, not crossing into Aurora's duel, holding the ring exactly as law demanded, while keeping Kane's men from swarming her. Windrider guards locked beside him. Steel clanged, bodies collided, shouts and snarls ricocheted through torch smoke. Yet the center remained theirs, brutal and clear. Kane circled Aurora, chest heaving, blood at his lip, eyes gone feral with hate. "You think a trick of light makes you queen?" Aurora, still in white wolf form, stalked left, forcing him toward the active ward lines. Silver glowed under her paws with each step, answering her like remembered language. He feinted high, then snapped old claim tongue again, voice cracking with force. "Brand obeys, Brand binds, kneel." Pain lanced through her collarbone, savage enough to blur vision. She dropped to one foreleg, breath tearing. Kane lunged to finish it. Aurora shifted mid-motion, wolf collapsing back into woman with claws still extended, and seized the edge of her own scar. She ripped it open in one hard pull, tearing out the poisoned ridge of blackened tissue Kane had hidden there. Agony flashed white, then cleared. Dark flecks of wolfsbane ink hit the stones and hissed against the live ward. Kane actually recoiled. Aurora rose, blood running down her arm, and slammed her marked palm against his chest. "Truth see him," she said. The ward answered instantly. Silver chains of light sprang from the floor and wrapped his torso, wrists, throat, pinning him upright in front of every witness. A brand like molten script burned across his sternum through leather and skin alike. Oath breaker. Kane fought the bindings, muscles standing out in cords, but every lie he had spoken seemed to tighten them further. He bared his teeth at her, voice raw. "You were made to kneel." Aurora stepped close enough that he could not mistake her expression. No, I was made to choose. He spat a curse and threw himself forward one last time. The chains jerked tight with a sound like struck iron. His half-shift faltered, then collapsed out of him in a violent shudder. He dropped to his knees, gasping, still glaring up with undimmed malice. Bastion broke from the perimeter as the last Valewood guard was disarmed, crossed the circle in 3 strides, and drove Kane face down to the stone, with one hand between his shoulders. Amber blazed in Bastion's eyes, wolf close beneath his skin, but he looked to Aurora for the final word. The hall went silent around them, ragged breathing and crackling moonfire the only sounds left. Elder Sorrel, voice hoarse, called formal process. By truth ward and witnessed forgery, claimant stands condemned. Crown invoker may pass sentence under high law. Aurora Nightshade, speak judgment. Aurora looked at Kane pinned on the dais he had tried to steal, at the flakes of his writ scattered like ash across her blood mark, at the chain wardens who no longer met his eyes, at the packs who had watched her called property and now waited for her voice. By blood and crown, she said, each word steady, I sentence Kane Valewood to death for oath-breaking, coercive branding, and attempted murder under tribunal ward. Sorrel struck her staff once. So sealed. The silver chains constricted in a final pulse. Kane's body arched, then went still. The ward light dimmed around him, leaving only smoke-threatened silence where his power had stood. Aurora remained upright in the center ring, blood on her hand, moonfire fading beneath her feet, while the great hall understood that the war had just changed names. Aurora remained in the center ring until Elder Sorrel descended, palm lifted in formal request rather than command. May the ward release the condemned, she said to the floor, and only then did the silver chains unwind from Kane's body and sink back into stone. Sorrel turned to the scribes. Record every article. Forged writ ash to sealed archive. Wolfsbane cloth and vial to healer custody under dual lock. Amended petition entered as coercive instrument and struck from precedent. Her staff tapped once beside Kane's fallen hand. No one will ever cite this night to justify a chain again. Captain Ilya moved with Windrider guards to disarm the remaining Valewood men. They offered resistance in pockets, and then, when the truth mark on Kane's chest was read aloud, they folded. Garin was dragged in from the lower terrace with wrists bound, still ash-streaked from the brazier room he had helped prepare. When he saw Aurora standing unbowed in the moonlight, he looked away first. Mara crossed the dais carrying a clean cloth and the same unflinching expression she had worn all night, took Aurora's bloodied hand and wrapped it with efficient care. Bastion stood a step back until Aurora looked at him. He was still half-shifted at the edges, power close under his skin, but his voice came quiet and clear. The trial is done. One right remains only if you want it. Under temple witness, with your word first. His eyes held hers with fierce steadiness. Do you want to complete the bond tonight? Aurora felt the hall watching, waiting for spectacle again, and refused them that shape. She stepped toward him until their shoulders nearly touched and answered for him alone. Yes, but not as transfer, not as rescue. Her wrapped hand pressed briefly over his heart. As choice. By full moonrise, the temple moonwell behind the great hall had been opened and ringed with witnesses bound to silence law. Snowmelt ran under the stone grates in a thin, bright thread, catching moonlight and throwing it upward so the chamber seemed lit from beneath. Sorrel stood as legal witness. Mara stood as healer witness. Ilya stood with the guard at the threshold, blades lowered, no chains, no crowding. Bastion removed his weapons at the entrance and set them on the offering table one by one, sword, belt knife, wrist blade. Then he walked to the well and knelt before Aurora exactly as he had on the dais, throat and pulse bared, hands open on his thighs. If you say stop, he said, voice roughened by restraint, I stop. If you say no, I stand and guard you unchanged. Do you consent to my mark?" The answer rose from a place in her that had finally stopped bracing for a blow. "I consent." She watched the words strike him like grace and burden together. He stood only when she touched his shoulder, and he did not take her until she tipped her head in invitation. His hand came to the side of her neck, warm, careful, thumb resting just below her ear while his breath fanned across the junction of neck and shoulder, where skin was thin and pulse spoke clearly. The bite was sharp at first, clean pain that flashed white, and immediate. Then it changed. Heat poured through the wound in a molten line, not burning, remaking. The old ache around her reclaimed scar flared in answer, and for one frightened beat, she thought the poison would strike again. Instead, silver gold light raced under her skin from the new mark to the old brand, wrapped it, and burned through the black residue Cain had buried there. She felt it go, felt the bitterness lift like smoke pulled out of a room. A broken place she had carried for months loosened and opened to warmth. Bastion made a low sound against her skin, half relief, half reverence, and the bond slammed fully into place between them. Storm rain, cedar, iron, moon water. His memories did not pour into her as pictures, but as truths. A boy taught that crowns consumed men, a warrior choosing exile over tyranny, a leader terrified of wanting anyone enough to become vulnerable to loss. She let him feel her in return. Kennelstone, iron cuffs, the refusal to disappear, the exact moment she decided to run. His mouth lifted from her shoulder. Foreheads touching, breath shared, he whispered, "Mine. Not possession. Recognition. A vow of protection offered upward, not pressed down." Aurora's fingers found his wrist, pulse hammering against her palm. She raised his arm between them, held his gaze, and asked, because reciprocity mattered more than ritual, "Do you consent to my mark, Bastion Windrider?" His answering smile broke like dawn after siege. "With everything I am." She bit over his pulse point, deliberate and sure. Pain sparked through her jaw, and his body arched once under her hands, then steadied as the same silver-gold current surged back across the bond. His scars lit in thin runic lines. Her new shoulder mark blazed in answer. Where Cain's brand had sat like a command, the skin now shone clean, overlaid by a twin pattern that matched Bastion's wrist. Two interlocking crescents, storm and moon, joined. "Yours," she breathed against his skin. "Mate," he answered, and the word settled into both of them like a final stone placed in an arch that would not fall. When the light receded, it did not vanish. It remained as a steady inner warmth, a second heartbeat no longer wild, but sure. Bastion wrapped her in his arms, and she let herself lean fully, cheek to his chest, listening to the rhythm that had once felt like an echo and now felt like home. Mara wiped her eyes without pretending otherwise. Sorel bowed her head, formal and deeply respectful. At the doorway, Ilya exhaled the breath he had been holding for what looked like hours. 3 days later, under a hard blue winter sky, the council reconvened in the same great hall and read judgment into law. Cain's forged instruments were displayed as ash in a sealed crystal dish, then interred beneath archive stone with a ruling etched above them, "Coercion voids bond." Mara presented the wolfsbane cloth and vial, both catalogued and locked in healer vaults for training and prosecution standards. Garen and the wardens who had taken illegal payment were stripped of rank and sentenced to labor under sanctuary oversight rather than blood reprisal, a verdict Aurora demanded and Bastion upheld. "No martyr legends," she said to the chamber. "Let them build what they helped break." Sorel, voice carrying to every bench, ratified the final articles. By blood right awakened and council assent, Aurora Nightshade is recognized as Moon Queen of the United Pacts. By war command, witness, and accepted bond, Bastion Windrider is confirmed Alpha King. Reclamation right is abolished in full. Consent is now the first law of bonding. She turned to Aurora then, and at last revealed the loaded truth behind her flint-eyed scrutiny. I served your mother in her last winter. I failed to save her crown. I will not fail yours. Bastion did not take the high throne alone. He cleared space beside it and had a second seat carved from the same mountain block. Equal height, equal arms, runes intertwined at the base where their hands could meet unseen by court if needed. Ilya was named High Captain of the United Guard. Mara took charge of the first sanctuary house in the old Valewood Keep, its kennel yard rebuilt into a healing court with warm floors, open gates, and doors fitted with quiet leather hinges because Bastion remembered the latch that made Aurora flinch. By the first week of spring, snow had withdrawn from the upper terraces, and the great hall where she had arrived barefoot and bleeding glowed with torchlight, and early flowers braided through every pillar. Pax knelt not in terror, but in oath, as Aurora and Bastion stood before moonlit stone in ceremonial gray and silver. No chains, no claim tongue, no hidden clauses. Sorel asked the final rite. Do you choose one another under wolf law and crown law, freely and without coercion? Aurora looked at Bastion, at the scar on his throat she had traced in sleepless dark, at the wrist mark that matched her shoulder, at the man who had made power into shelter and never once mistaken shelter for ownership. I choose him. Freely. Bastion's voice carried like a vow carved in oak. I choose her. Always. They clasped forearms, then hands, then foreheads, and spoke together so the hall could hear every word. No chains between us, only vows. When the pack answered with a single thunderous howl, it rose through the rafters and out over the thawing valley, and Aurora felt the bond between them settle deeper still, steady as bedrock. Moon Queen and Alpha King, mated, married, side by side on a throne neither would ever use to make someone kneel.